In this video, we're going to look at decimals and fractions. More specifically, how do you convert a fraction into a decimal? And you can find this in Unit 4.3 of your textbook. Okay, so there are a couple of ways that you can convert a fraction into a decimal, and it depends on what sort of fraction you are given. The easiest one is if our denominator is 10 or 100 or 1,000 or something like that. That is a really easy way to convert from a fraction to a decimal, especially if you know how to convert from a decimal into a fraction. So you should remember that this is called 7/10, right? 7/10. And if you think about our place value chart, I'm just going to use ones. If you think about our place value, this is our ones unit, this is our tenths, hundredths, thousandths, tenths, thousands, 100,000s. Alright, and now I'm going to say to you again, this is 7/10. 7/10. So that tells me that I have 7 in the tenths column. So if I look at the tenths column, I have 7. Do I have any holes? No. So to convert this decimal, all I have to do is put my last digit of the numerator into the place value of the denominator. So in this case, it's 7/10. So I've placed the 7 in the tenths column and filled in any other numbers. That's how to convert that decimal. But what happens if your denominator is not a 10 or 100 or 1,000, etc.? Well, sometimes we'll have a fraction where we could easily turn it into a denominator that was 10 or 100 or thousands, like this one. You should be able to see that we can turn that denominator into 10 by using equivalent fractions. To get an equivalent fraction, we just have to do the same to the bottom as we do to the top. So to turn that into a 10, we would need to times by 2. And if we do that to the bottom, we have to do it to the top. So now I would have 14 over 10. Now that I have 14 over 10, I can use the exact same method. So again, I have 10, so it's going to be in the tenths column. It's my ones, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So it's my last digit is going to be in the tenths column, and my last digit is a 4, so that's going to be in the tenths column. And then I don't have any hundredths, I don't have any thousands, etc. But I do have one whole. I do have a 1 there because that is an improper fraction. So it's 1.4. So my answer is 1.4. So I've converted that fraction into a decimal. Now if this part was confusing to you, you could always turn this into a mixed fraction beforehand. So you could have done it and said 1 and 4 over 10, which is equal to 1 and 4 in the tenths column. So those are the two ways that we can do converting to decimal if the denominator is kind to us and it's a 10 or 100 or 1,000. So if that denominator had been 100, we just would have put the 4 in the hundredths column. Okay? But what happens when the denominator is not kind to us and it's a number like 8 or 3 or 9, where we cannot multiply it in order to be a nice round number? there is still a method we can use. What we do is we just look at the line, this line, which is called a vernaculum, for what it is. And you should remember that this line is equal to divide. So what this is actually saying is 3 divided by 8. So I'm going to do that. All I'm going to do is 3 divided by 8. So I'm going to go 3 divided by 8. Now, obviously, 8 doesn't fit into 3. So I'm going to have to add some zeros. Okay, but I had to put my decimal point there, otherwise I would have changed the number 3. Now I have not changed the number 3. So I say to myself, how many times does 8 go into 3? And I know that is 0 times. And I put my decimal up, and I had 3 left over. Now, how many times does 8 go into 30? Well, that is 3 times. And 3 times makes 24, which means I had 6 left over. Now, how many times does 8 go into 60? And that is 7, which is 56. So that's 4 left over. And 8 into 40 goes 5 times, 0 left over. So I can just ignore those. So I've converted this fraction into a decimal, which is equal to 0.375. So that's the method you have to use if you can't convert the denominator. If you like this method, you can also use it for any fraction. This one works for all of them. All we do is we say the line means divide. So that's 3 divided by 8. And we put the 3 there, and we put the 8 as the divide, and then we just work it out. If this is going on forever, we can round to however many decimals. And remember, if it's a reoccurring decimal like this, and it just keeps going forever, we can stop and we can put the dot above it. That is how we convert fractions to decimals.